The conference room on the top floor of Cole Development Group was quiet and cold. The long glass table reflected the bright lights above, making the room feel even more tense. At the end of the table sat 28-year-old Ava Cole. She felt like she was sitting in front of a jury instead of her own family. Across from her sat her father, Richard Cole. He was one of the most powerful real estate developers in Chicago. People in business respected him, but many were also afraid of him. His sharp eyes were fixed on Ava. Next to him sat Ava's stepmother, Laura. She looked calm and confident, almost pleased about the situation. Beside her were two company lawyers with serious faces, and Ava's younger brother Daniel, who now worked for their father's company. A thick stack of legal papers rested on the table in front of Ava. Richard slowly pushed the papers toward her. His voice was calm, but there was no kindness in it. "Sign the agreement," he said, "or walk away from this family for good." Ava looked down at the document. She had already read it earlier. The agreement was simple but brutal. If she signed it, she would give up everything connected to the Cole family. Her share in the company trust, the small townhouse that her late mother had left for her, any future inheritance from the family. In exchange, Richard promised to stop the lawsuit he was preparing against her. Ava had done something he believed was unforgivable. She had taken a legal case against a major redevelopment project in the city. The people she was defending were tenants who were being forced out of their homes. The developer behind that project was Cole Development Group, her father's company. The room felt heavy with tension. Laura watched Ava closely, almost enjoying the moment. Daniel kept his eyes on the table, refusing to look at his sister. Richard leaned forward slightly. "You either stand with your family," he said firmly, "or you stand against it." Everyone in the room expected Ava to argue. They expected her to defend herself, to fight back, maybe even to walk out. Instead, Ava stayed completely quiet. She slowly picked up the pen. Without saying a word, she signed the agreement. The sound of the pen moving across the paper seemed loud in the silent room. When she finished, she calmly placed the pen back on the table. For a moment nobody spoke. Then the tension suddenly disappeared. Richard leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile. Laura relaxed, clearly pleased. Daniel let out a quiet breath. They believed the fight was finally over. But Ava wasn't done. She reached into her folder and pulled out another document. Then she gently slid it across the glass table toward her father. Richard frowned slightly as the paper stopped in front of him. Ava looked directly at him. Her voice was calm and steady. "You should read what you just agreed to." Confusion spread across the room. One of the lawyers leaned forward. Laura's expression slowly changed. Daniel finally looked up, because in that moment, they began to realize something. The woman they believed they had cornered had just turned the entire game in her favor. Ava Cole grew up in a world of money, success, and power. Her father, Richard Cole, had built one of the largest real estate companies in Chicago. Their family lived in a huge house, attended expensive events, and moved in powerful business circles. From the outside, Ava's life looked perfect, but she never truly felt comfortable in that world. To investors, reporters, and business partners, Richard Cole was a brilliant and bold businessman. People often called him a visionary, because he transformed old neighborhoods into modern luxury developments. But Ava saw a different side of him. To her, her father often treated people like obstacles that needed to be removed. When he talked about redevelopment projects, he rarely mentioned the families who already lived there. He talked about profits, property value, and investors. The only person who balanced that world was Ava's mother, Margaret Cole. Margaret believed that wealth came with responsibility. She believed that people who had power and money should use it to help others. When Ava was a child, Margaret often took her to volunteer at local housing shelters and free legal clinics. While other children spent their weekends at private clubs or shopping malls, Ava sometimes spent hers helping organize donations or watching lawyers help families who were struggling. Those experiences stayed with her. Ava saw families who were afraid of losing their homes. She saw parents trying to explain to their children why they might have to move. She saw how painful and stressful eviction could be for ordinary people. Margaret always spoke gently but firmly about it. She told Ava that success meant nothing if it came at the cost of hurting others. Richard never liked those lessons. He expected Ava to grow up and eventually help run the family business. In his mind, the company was the future of the Cole family, and Ava was supposed to be part of it. But Margaret quietly encouraged Ava to listen to her own heart instead. When Ava turned 18, everything in her life suddenly changed. Margaret had been sick for a long time, and eventually she passed away. After her mother died, the house felt completely different. The warmth and kindness that Margaret brought into the family disappeared almost overnight. Richard became even more focused on his business, spending long hours at the office and treating the company like the only thing that mattered. 2 years later, Richard married Laura. Laura was very different from Margaret. She was smart, ambitious, and deeply interested in the business. She quickly became involved in Cole Development Group and started helping Richard make major decisions. She also had very strong opinions about Ava. Laura believed Ava's compassion and concern for others made her weak. In her eyes, the business world was about strength, strategy, and winning. And she slowly convinced Richard to see Ava the same way. As Ava finished high school and prepared for college, Richard expected her to study business or finance. He imagined her sitting in boardrooms one day, helping expand the company empire. But Ava had other plans. Instead of studying business, she chose to go to law school. And she didn't choose corporate law. She chose housing law and tenant rights. When Richard found out, he was furious. To him, it felt like a direct rejection of everything he had built. He believed Ava was turning against the family business. The decision created a deep and lasting distance between them. From that moment on, their relationship was never the same. To Richard, Ava's career choice wasn't just disappointing. It felt like betrayal, because the type of law she wanted to practice meant she would often represent people fighting against developers, people fighting against companies just like his. After finishing law school, Ava received several job offers. Some were from large law firms that worked closely with major corporations. Richard even offered her a high-paying position at Cole Development Group, where she could work with the company's legal department. But Ava refused all of them. Instead, she joined a small nonprofit legal organization that defended tenants who were facing eviction. The job paid very little compared to the offers she had received, but it allowed her to do the kind of work she believed in. Richard saw her decision as embarrassing. In his eyes, his daughter had chosen to stand with people fighting against developers instead of standing beside her own family. But Ava did not change her path. She lived quietly in a small townhouse that her mother had left for her before she died. The house wasn't nearly as grand as the family mansion, but to Ava it meant everything. It was the only place where she still felt connected to her mother. The rooms held memories of Margaret's kindness and the lessons she had taught. Living there reminded Ava why she had chosen her career. But while Ava focused on her work and tried to live peacefully, someone else was watching her very carefully. Laura. Over the years, Laura paid close attention to Ava's choices and actions. She believed Ava's independence and defiance could eventually become a problem for the family business. And in Laura's mind, that problem needed to be solved. Slowly and quietly, she began pushing Richard to take a harder position against his daughter. Because Laura believed one thing very strongly: Ava's independence needed to be broken. The turning point in Ava's life began with a new case at the nonprofit legal office where she worked. One morning, her team received a request for help from dozens of tenants living in a large apartment complex on the west side of the city. The building had recently been sold, and the new owners planned to tear it down and build luxury apartments in its place. Because of that plan, hundreds of residents were suddenly facing eviction. Many of them had lived there for years. Some families had small children. Others were elderly people who had nowhere else to go. The tenants believed they had been treated unfairly. Several of them said they were pressured to leave their homes without proper notice. Some said they were offered confusing agreements that pushed them to move out quickly. Ava agreed to review the case. At first, she thought it would be like many other eviction cases she had worked on before. But as she began reading through the documents, something unexpected caught her attention. She noticed the name of the development company behind the project. Her heart sank. The company planning the redevelopment was Cole Development Group, her father's company. For a long moment, Ava just stared at the papers in silence. She knew this case would be different now. When Ava shared the information with her coworkers, many of them immediately advised her to step away from the case. They worried it would create a serious conflict of interest. They told her it might damage the nonprofit organization if the situation turned into a public fight between her and her family. But Ava refused to leave the case. She believed the tenants had been treated unfairly. After reviewing the documents more carefully, she suspected that some of the eviction notices might even be illegal. She knew the situation would create tension with her father, but she also believed that the people living in those apartments deserved someone to defend them. So Ava stayed on the case. Soon the lawsuit was officially filed in court, and within days the story exploded in the media. News articles began appearing across the city. Headlines quickly caught the public's attention. Developer's daughter sues her own father's company. Family feud turns into major housing lawsuit. Television reporters and online news outlets began discussing the story. The situation became a public controversy almost overnight. When Richard Cole saw the headlines, he was furious. To him, this wasn't just a legal dispute. It was a personal betrayal. He believed Ava had publicly embarrassed him and threatened the reputation of his company. But Laura saw something else. She saw an opportunity. Laura quietly convinced Richard that Ava's actions could damage the company's relationships with investors and business partners. She warned him that the lawsuit might make people question the company's practices. Daniel, who had recently started working closely with their father, supported Richard completely. He wanted to prove that he was loyal to the company and ready to take on more responsibility. Together, they began looking for a way to stop Ava. Richard decided the best way to control the situation was to force her into a difficult position. Company lawyers started carefully reviewing every legal connection between Ava and the Cole family's financial assets. Eventually, they discovered something important. The townhouse Ava lived in was not legally owned by her alone. Technically, it was part of a family trust that Richard controlled. That meant he had the legal power to challenge her right to live there. When Laura heard this, she immediately suggested a strategy. They would force Ava to sign a legal agreement giving up all her rights to the family trust and any future inheritance. If she refused, they would move forward with removing her from the townhouse and cutting her off financially. Richard believed the pressure would eventually make Ava give up. He believed she would choose security and family over the case. But what Richard didn't know was that Ava had already started looking deeper into the company's redevelopment projects. And what she was beginning to uncover was much bigger than a single eviction case. The pressure on Ava did not come all at once. It started slowly, but it never stopped. A few days after the lawsuit became public, Richard's lawyers took their first step. They filed legal motions to challenge Ava's right to live in the townhouse her mother had left her. The notice arrived one morning by mail. The letter explained that the house was part of the Cole family trust, which Richard controlled. Because of that, they argued that Ava did not have full ownership of the property. If the court agreed, she could be forced to leave. Ava read the letter quietly in her kitchen. For a moment, she felt the weight of what her father was trying to do. He wasn't just fighting her in court. He was trying to take away her home. At the same time, pressure began building around her workplace. The nonprofit legal organization where Ava worked started receiving uncomfortable phone calls and messages. Some of the group's financial supporters were worried about being caught in a legal fight with one of the most powerful developers in the city. A few funding partners even hinted that they might withdraw their support if the situation became worse. Inside the office, Ava's co-workers tried to be supportive, but many of them were nervous. Some quietly suggested that it might be better if she stepped away from the case. They believed the lawsuit could damage the organization and make it harder for them to help other people. But Ava refused. She knew the tenants were counting on her. Meanwhile, the conflict inside the Cole family became much more public. Daniel gave a short interview to a local business reporter. During the interview, he criticized Ava's actions. He said her lawsuit was hurting the family company and putting hundreds of jobs at risk. The article spread quickly online. When Ava saw it, she felt a painful twist in her chest. Her own brother had chosen to stand against her in public. Laura continued pushing Richard to be even more aggressive. She told him Ava was not just fighting a legal case. She was trying to embarrass him in front of the city and destroy the reputation he had spent decades building. Laura's words slowly fueled Richard's anger. Soon he began preparing the document that would force Ava into a final choice. The agreement was simple. Ava would have to sign away all her rights to the family trust, the townhouse, and any future inheritance. If she refused, Richard would continue the legal fight and remove her from the house. It was meant to leave her with only two options: sign the agreement, or lose everything. During those stressful weeks, Ava often found herself thinking about her mother. Late at night, when she sat alone in the townhouse reading legal documents, she remembered a conversation she had with Margaret shortly before she passed away. Her mother had looked tired but serious that day. Margaret had said something Ava never forgot: "Your father's empire is built on things people never see." At the time, Ava didn't fully understand what she meant, but now, those words stayed in her mind. They pushed her to start asking deeper questions about the redevelopment projects connected to her father's company. What she first thought would take a few days of research slowly turned into weeks of investigation. Night after night, Ava sat at her desk going through public property records, corporate filings, and redevelopment permits. She followed paper trails between different companies and business partners. At first, the information looked confusing and complicated, but slowly, a pattern began to appear. She discovered that several small companies had purchased properties in certain neighborhoods months before major redevelopment announcements were made. Those companies did not appear connected to Cole Development Group at first, but when Ava looked closer, she found hidden links between them and Richard's business network. She also discovered documents suggesting that tenants in some buildings had been pressured to move out quickly using questionable legal tactics. Some eviction notices appeared rushed or incomplete. In a few cases, financial records showed strange transfers between shell companies and development accounts. The deeper Ava investigated, the more disturbing the picture became. It began to look like her father's business empire might not have been built only through smart deals and investments. It might also have been built through hidden strategies designed to quietly push people out of their homes. For a long time, Ava sat silently in her chair, staring at the growing stack of documents. If the evidence was correct, this wasn't just about one apartment complex. It was much bigger. But Ava did not rush to reveal what she had discovered. Instead, she stayed calm and continued collecting proof. She organized documents, saved records, and carefully connected the evidence. Because she understood something very important. Her father believed he was about to win. He believed the pressure would eventually break her. And Ava was ready to let him believe that. Just a little longer. The tension inside the conference room was heavy. Everyone was watching Ava. Richard had already pushed the agreement across the table and given his final ultimatum. "Sign the agreement," he said firmly, "or lose everything." The words hung in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. Ava slowly looked down at the document in front of her. She had read every line of it before coming to the meeting. If she signed it, she would lose her share in the family trust. She would lose the townhouse her mother left her. She would lose any future inheritance. In other words, she would walk away from everything connected to the Cole family. Richard watched her closely, waiting for resistance. He expected her to argue. He expected her to refuse. But Ava surprised everyone. Without saying a word, she calmly picked up the pen. She signed the document. The scratching sound of the pen on paper was the only noise in the quiet room. When she finished, she placed the pen back on the table. For a moment, there was silence. Then Richard leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile. To him, the fight was finally over. Laura also relaxed in her seat, looking pleased. Daniel let out a quiet breath and leaned back as well. They believed Ava had finally given up. But Ava remained calm. She opened her folder and took out another document. Then she slowly slid it across the glass table toward her father. Richard frowned slightly. "What is this?" he asked. Ava looked directly at him. "You should read it," she said quietly. One of the company lawyers picked up the document first. As he read it, his expression quickly changed. The paper was a legal filing sent to federal investigators. It reported possible fraud and illegal eviction practices connected to several companies linked to Cole Development Group. Attached to the filing were dozens of documents: property records, corporate filings, financial transfers, evidence Ava had carefully collected during her investigation. The lawyer's face turned pale as he continued reading. Richard grabbed the paper from him and scanned the pages quickly. His confident expression slowly disappeared. because the filing included something very important. By forcing Ava to sign the agreement in front of lawyers and witnesses, Richard had officially confirmed that he personally controlled several companies connected to the redevelopment projects. Some of those companies were the same shell companies mentioned in Ava's evidence. That meant the responsibility for those actions now pointed directly at him. The room suddenly exploded into chaos. The lawyers began speaking quickly to each other. Daniel stood up in shock. Laura's confident smile disappeared. Richard looked at Ava with anger and disbelief. Only then did he understand what had happened. Ava had never planned to defeat him with arguments or emotions. She had planned to defeat him with the law. Ava slowly stood from her chair. She looked directly at her father. Her voice was calm but strong. "You taught me that power was everything," she said. She paused for a moment. "I just learned how to use it differently." No one in the room spoke. Within a few weeks, federal investigators began examining the financial records and redevelopment deals connected to Coal Development Group. The investigation quickly grew larger. And slowly, the powerful empire Richard Cole had spent decades building began to collapse. The investigation shook the entire Cole family to its core. Richard lost control of his company almost immediately. His name was now tied to multiple legal charges, and the empire he had spent decades building began falling apart. Daniel tried to protect himself. He distanced himself from the scandal, avoiding the media and the family's public battles. He wanted to save his career, even if it meant leaving his father behind. Laura disappeared from public view as well. The higher the investigation went, the less she was seen or heard from. Even with all this, Ava did not feel fully victorious. Watching her father's actions exposed and his reputation destroyed left a complicated mix of emotions inside her. She didn't feel simple joy or relief. She felt the weight of years of family conflict and betrayal. But there was one thing that brought her real satisfaction. The tenant case she had worked on finally reached its conclusion in court. Hundreds of families were allowed to stay in their homes. They could continue their lives without fear of being forced out. The community Ava had fought to protect could breathe again. News outlets and social media began sharing her story. People all over the country admired her courage. She became nationally recognized for standing up against corporate housing abuse, and her work inspired other lawyers and advocates to do the same. Ava did not stop there. She used the attention to help expand her nonprofit legal organization. More communities now had access to legal support for housing issues. Families who had nowhere else to turn found help because of her efforts. For the first time in her life, Ava felt she was truly following the path her mother had encouraged her to take. Margaret had always believed that wealth and power should be used responsibly, to help people rather than control them. Ava could now see herself honoring that lesson. Sitting in her modest townhouse, surrounded by the people and families she had helped, Ava finally felt a sense of purpose and freedom. She had not only stood up for herself, but also for those who had no voice. The fight had been long and painful, but it had changed her life and the lives of many others for the better. Ava knew she was on the right path, and for the first time in years, she felt truly at peace with who she had become. Months later, Ava returned to her mother's townhouse. The family trust had been dissolved during the investigation, and now the house legally belonged to her. Inside, everything felt quiet and familiar. As she walked through the rooms, she opened a drawer and found a small box her mother had left there long ago. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a handwritten note from Margaret. "Compassion is never weakness. It's the bravest choice a person can make." Ava smiled softly. She placed the note beside her desk, where she could see it every day. She walked to the window and looked outside. The neighborhood was alive with sound. Neighbors talked to each other. Children ran and played in the streets. Life went on, ordinary and beautiful. These were the same people her father had once treated as obstacles, as if they were problems to be pushed aside for profit. Ava felt a quiet pride inside her chest. She hadn't just stood up to her father or fought for her own rights. She had helped protect the community he had tried to ignore. She had changed the system he had built, piece by piece, in a way that made a real difference. For a long moment, she just stood there, watching, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The battles, the betrayals, the long nights of research and preparation. They had all led to this moment. And for the first time since her mother had died, Ava felt completely free, free from her father's control, free to live according to her own values, free to use her skills and her heart to help others, just as her mother had always hoped she would. She took a deep breath, letting the calm and the sunlight fill the room. The past was behind her, and the future was hers to shape. And now, more than ever, she knew she was ready,